Hi everyone, I'm Avdesh God. In this video, we'll learn about what is data blending, how to blend data, what are the primary and secondary data sources, and how to identify these. Moreover, we'll also learn about swapping the primary and secondary data sources. Well, let's get started. Data blending is one of the many plausible ways of utilizing data from multiple data sources to build a view. Let us consider two data sources, one containing the sales data for the states and regions, and other containing the quantities sold by the states and region. Let us connect to these one by one. As we move to sheets, we can see both of these data sources at the top left. We can easily switch between these, and the dimensions and measures will change accordingly as we change the data source. That is, we can see the dimensions and measures of the selected data source in the data pane below. Let us now create a quick view to understand more. Using the Control key, select the state and sales from the sales data source. Go to Show Me and select the horizontal bar chart. Tableau will automatically plot the bar chart for you, taking in the selected fields. If you'll notice, a blue tick mark has now come up on the single cylinder icon of the sales data source. This blue tick mark identifies that here in this worksheet, the sales data source is the primary data source. Any data source from which the very first field is brought to the view acts as the primary data source. Let us now switch to the other data source, that is, quantity sold. If you'll notice, there is an orange link in front of the field state. Tableau has already set up a relationship on the state field between these two data sources, and this is indeed utilized for the data blending. Moreover, there is also a broken link in front of the field region. Reason being, Tableau consider the region field as another potential field to set up the relationship between these two data sources. We can click on this grayed out broken link and it will turn to orange. This will set up a relationship on both region and state fields between these two data sources. If we want to remove any of these fields from the relationship, we can again uncheck this link, and it will again turn back to the grayed out broken link. Alternatively, we can also set up the relationships between two data sources by going to the data dropdown under the top menu and selecting Edit Blend Relationships. Here, we can either edit the automatically set up relationships or we can even choose a custom one. Let's close this for the time being. Let's now bring up the quantity field from the quantity sold data source to the view in the column shelf. Here we can see that some of the states like Connecticut, etc. are getting null values for quantity sold. Reason being, the information of the quantity sold for these states isn't available out there in the quantity sold data source. Isn't this view similar to the left join that we discussed in the previous video? That is, all of the records or the states from the left table will populate along with the matching records, that is, the quantity sold from the right table. Then how come data blending is different from the joins? Well, let me walk you through that. In case of data blending, Tableau will indeed send two separate queries to these two data sources, that is, the quantity sold and sales separately. One of the query is sent to the sales data source, asking for the sum of sales for all of the available states. This will indeed act as a primary data source or the hypothetical left table. The second query is sent to the quantity data source, asking for the sum of quantity aggregated by states. Here in this case, the quantity data source is acting as a secondary data source or indeed the hypothetical right table. These two aggregated result sets are then joined based on the relationship that we have already set up, and in this manner the view is created. Relatively, these blend relationship fields are acting as the join key on the aggregated data that is returned by primary and secondary data sources. Whereas if we remember, in case of joins, the data is joined at a row level instead, whereas in case of data blending, it's getting joined at an aggregated level defined by the level of detail of the view. If you'll notice, you can also see an orange tick mark in front of the quantity sold data source. That's how we can identify the secondary data sources. The primary and secondary nature of the data source is only defined at the worksheet level. Or in general, the primary and secondary data sources are not at all created at the global level. If we'll open up a new sheet, these blue and orange check marks in front of the data sources will no longer exist. Now this time, let's try bringing the first field from the quantity sold data source. If we look closely, this time the quantity sold data source is treated as the primary data source in worksheet 2. If we switch back to sheet 1, it has not impacted the primary and secondary data source relationship for first sheet view. And another way to bring data from two different data sources is a cross-database join. This technique uses the traditional joins with data coming from two different types of data sources. One of the data source may be an SQL server and the other may be an Excel file. Here in this case, we have the sales data in Excel, whereas the quantity sold as a CSV. Let's quickly implement the same. Let us connect to the Excel-based data source first. To add a different data source, that is, a CSV data source in our case, click on Add option available in the left connection pane. Now go to the required data source. We'll click on More and select the CSV file. Tableau will show up the second data source out here in the connection pane itself. Now we can easily set up the joins between these two data sources using the state as the join key. Let's change the join key to state instead. Let's try to build the same view using this dataset built on a cross-database join. Drag the states from sales to rows and sales and quantity to the column shelf. Well, this is the same view that we built earlier using data blending. But this time, we have utilized a cross-database join. Remember, this feature of cross-database join was made available after Tableau 10.2 onwards. In this video, we learned about data blending, how to set up relationships and build views using multiple data sources with the help of data blending. We also learned about the primary and secondary data sources and how to identify the same. Moreover, we also understood the alternative way of building views using multiple different data sources, and that too with the help of cross-database joins. In the next video, we'll understand the relationships in Tableau.